The sound of paper scraping against the mailbox made me wince before I even opened it. A morning breeze carried the scent of cut grass and the faint tang of manure from my barn. Normally, I liked mornings like this. Quiet, familiar, predictable. But that envelope? It wasn't just mail. It was trouble. Chore trouble. And if you've ever lived in one of those neighborhoods, you know, the subtle thrill of dread that comes when you see that official logo stamped across the top. Inside was a notice. Violation of property aesthetics, the title screamed in bold. Apparently my barn wasn't up to community standards set by people who thought a white picket, fence and perfectly manicured rose bushes were the pinnacle of human achievement. I looked at the peeling paint on my barn and, honestly, I felt a small surge of pride. That barn had character, history even. My grandfather built it with his own hands. But no, to the HOA, it was an eyesore, a crime against suburban decorum. I shoved the letter back into its envelope and muttered, well, at least it's not a traffic ticket. My dog, Daisy, tilted her head at me as if she understood the gravity of the situation. By noon, I was outside, fixing a loose hinge on the barn door. That's when I first saw her, Marilyn, HOA president, striding up my driveway in her sensible heels and immaculate cardigan. She looked like she could audit a tax return and scold a toddler at the same time. Her clipboard was clutched like a weapon, her lips pressed tight. Good afternoon, she said, all smile and steel. I'm here to inspect your property for the violation. I wiped sweat from my brow and tried to keep my voice neutral. I just got the notice. Is there, anything specific you're concerned about? She tapped the clipboard and raised an eyebrow. The barn, the paint, the general aura of it. It's unsettling to neighbors. I wanted to laugh, but I knew better. Unsettling, got it. Marilyn's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then leaned in conspiratorially. I've called someone to help ensure compliance. Before I could ask who, she was already marching down the driveway, phone in hand, calling for backup. And just like that, the storm I didn't see coming began forming on my quiet little property. Something in her tone made my stomach twist. This wasn't going to be just another HOA complaint. No, this was escalation. And I had a very bad feeling about what someone to help really meant. I glanced at the barn door, imagining the scenario of a group of strangers trying to barge in. That's when the first unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps on gravel reached my ears. The crunch of gravel under boots made my heart sink, in a way that coffee never could. I stepped closer to the barn, trying to look casual, like I wasn't already picturing a team of HOA enforcers storming through my grandfather's wooden doors. Daisy barked once, sharp and protective, before retreating behind my legs. From the corner of my eye, I saw two men approach, wearing the sort of generic black jackets that said, security without saying much else. One had mirrored sunglasses even though it was barely noon, and the other carried a clipboard suspiciously similar to Marilyn's. Good afternoon, the taller one said, voice flat, professional. Like he'd delivered this line 1,000 times. We've been sent to inspect the barn and ensure compliance. I blinked. Sent? By the HOA? He nodded, expression unreadable. Yes. They requested we check for safety and structural violations. I swallowed. Right. Well, I'm just doing some minor repairs today. You're welcome to look from the outside, but before I could finish, the shorter man jotted something on his clipboard and said, we'll need to come inside to make a full assessment. My chest tightened. I'd known this was escalating, but I hadn't expected literal intrusion. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my tone calm, even as my mind ran through every legal loophole I knew. I'm afraid that's not going to happen. This is private property. The taller one's mirrored gaze didn't waver. We have a directive. It's urgent. Please step aside. Marilyn's voice cut through from the driveway, sharp and clipped. Now, let's not make this difficult. Compliance is non-negotiable, she smiled. Oh, that HOA smile. The one that could freeze a lake. I clenched my fists. Non-negotiable, huh? Well, I happen to know someone else is here today. Someone with actual authority. The county sheriff, in fact. You're welcome to wait outside while he handles this. The gravel shifted as the men froze. Daisy growled low, warning. Marilyn's eyes narrowed, and for a brief second, the air felt like it could snap in half. Sheriff? One of the men repeated, as if the word itself was a threat. I nodded, holding the barn door slightly ajar behind me. He insisted I keep the place locked until he arrived. So, we wait. The silence that followed was heavy. The kind that makes you notice every creak of wood, every whisper of wind through the trees. Daisy circled my feet, alert. Marilyn tapped her phone again, her fingers jerky, impatient. I realized then that this wasn't just a confrontation. It was a standoff, a suburban drama about to spiral completely out of control. And then, from the corner of my vision, I saw a flash of blue lights through the trees, lights that promised to turn this HOA nightmare into something much bigger. The blue lights cut through the dusty air like a spotlight on a stage, bouncing across the weathered boards of my barn. My heart raced, not with fear exactly, but with that strange mix of relief and adrenaline you get when you know someone with real authority has your back. Daisy barked again, this time excited rather than alarmed, circling my legs like a furry whirlwind. Marilyn's face, on the other hand, went from confident smugness to visible panic in the span of a heartbeat. Her perfectly manicured hands fumbled with her phone, and I caught a glimpse of her muttering something frantic under her breath. "Sheriff Thompson," I said, raising my voice just enough for her to hear. "Glad you could make it." The security men froze mid-step, clearly realizing this wasn't just another HOA intimidation exercise. One of them glanced at the other, silently asking, "Do we leave now?" Marilyn's voice squeaked at the edges. "This is excessive. There's no need for—" "Mom," a calm, authoritative voice interrupted, cutting through the tension like a knife. Sheriff Thompson stepped out of his vehicle, badge gleaming and presence commanding. "Let's de-escalate." Everyone stepped back. I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me. I hadn't just been bluffing with the sheriff. He had actually called ahead, insisting he'd wait inside the barn until the situation resolved. And now he was here. Real law enforcement, not HOA armchair enforcers. The taller man, clipboard still in hand, muttered something about authority under his breath, but there was no hiding the hesitation. Marilyn's smile had vanished entirely, replaced with a flush of anger that radiated through the morning air. "Listen," I said, trying to keep my own voice steady. "I want peace here. The barn isn't a hazard, it's just old. If anyone wants to argue about aesthetics, you can do it at the next HOA meeting, not by breaking into private property." Sheriff Thompson nodded. "Exactly. No one's coming inside without my presence, and you'll respect that. Right now, this is a private residence, and everyone needs to step back." Marilyn's phone buzzed again. She glanced at it, her lips pressed tight, and I could see the gears turning. She was plotting, scheming, probably thinking there had to be some loophole she could exploit. I felt Daisy nuzzle my leg, sensing my tension, and I realized I'd been holding my breath. The standoff had gone quiet, but the underlying electricity, Marilyn's determination, her sense of control was still crackling. Then, from the barn door behind me, a loud clunk echoed. My stomach dropped. I hadn't closed it properly in my rush to meet the sheriff. Something or someone was inside. The clunk echoed again, louder this time, reverberating off the wooden beams of the barn like a warning. My pulse spiked. I had left the barn door slightly ajar when I stepped outside to meet the sheriff, and now I could hear the subtle shuffle of movement inside. Sheriff Thompson's eyes narrowed. "Stay calm. Everyone stay back." His voice was calm but firm, the kind that doesn't invite argument. Marilyn, of course, did not stay back. She craned her neck, practically salivating at the idea of some HOA victory, her heels clicking against the gravel as she leaned forward like a hawk. I took a step toward the barn, Daisy at my side, her hackles raised. "It's empty," I said, hoping my voice didn't betray the adrenaline surging through me. But deep down, I knew better. Whoever, or whatever, was inside was about to be revealed. Sheriff Thompson pushed past me with a calm authority, hand on his holster, and stepped into the shadowed interior. Dust motes floated in the shafts of sunlight streaming through the cracks in the wood. The smell of hay, wood, and old oil filled the air. Every step echoed. Then the sheriff's hand shot out, and he flipped a light switch. Fluorescent bulbs flickered to life, cutting through the shadows. And there she was, Marilyn's jaw dropped so low it was almost cartoonish, standing just inside the barn, framed in the light. "Ma'am," Sheriff Thompson said calmly, voice carrying, "you are not authorized to be in this building. Step outside immediately." Marilyn opened her mouth, then closed it. Her phone buzzed again, frantic, and I caught a glimpse of the message on the screen. "Back up on the way." Her eyebrows furrowed, and her lips pressed into a thin line. She hadn't anticipated this level of escalation. I leaned against the barn frame, heart hammering, and muttered under my breath, "You really should have read the fine print." Marilyn's glare could have cut through steel. This isn't over." She sputtered, flustered, but the sheriff's presence held her back. The two security men shuffled nervously, unsure whether to intervene or retreat. Then the sheriff turned to me with that calm, knowing look. "So, this is your property?" I nodded, swallowing a lump in my throat. "Yes, sir, and if anyone tries to take it over or force entry without my consent, we have a serious problem." Marilyn's phone buzzed again. This time, she didn't even look at it. Her strategy was collapsing, her confidence crumbling in real time. And then, just as I started to feel a sliver of relief, the sheriff's phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at it, his expression tightening slightly. We might have another complication, he muttered. I froze. Another complication? That didn't sound good. Sheriff Thompson's brow furrowed as he glanced down at his phone, the glow illuminating his sharp features. I could feel the tension coil tighter around my chest, like a spring about to snap. Daisy whimpered softly at my feet, sensing the shift in energy. Another call, he muttered, barely audible over the soft hum of the barn lights. It seems there's a report of suspicious activity in this area. Could be unrelated, could be linked to what's happening here. Marilyn's eyes widened, and she straightened like a doll whose strings had suddenly been yanked. Suspicious activity? Oh, I assure you, Sheriff, it's just my concern for the neighborhood. Her voice was pitched too high, dripping with faux innocence. I almost laughed at the audacity, but the look on the sheriff's face told me this was no time for humor. The two security men exchanged nervous glances. One of them muttered, "Maybe we should wait in the car." His uncertainty was palpable. The illusion of authority that Marilyn had wielded moments ago was evaporating, like morning mist. The sheriff put a hand on my shoulder, steadying me. "Listen, we're going to make sure this situation doesn't escalate, but we need to know exactly what's going on, and we need to do it carefully." I nodded, my throat tight. "You got it, but she's not going anywhere near my barn." I jerked a thumb toward Marilyn, whose expression was a mixture of frustration and disbelief. Sheriff Thompson gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod and turned toward her. "Ma'am, you need to step outside now," she huffed, muttered something, under her breath about rules and authority, but complied, storming out with her heels clacking against the wooden floor. I could practically hear her gears turning, plotting some next move. Once she was gone, the sheriff and I moved closer to the barn door. I noticed a faint scuff mark on the wooden planks. Fresh. Someone had tried to force the door while Marilyn was distracted by my protest. My stomach dropped. This wasn't just about the HOA now. Someone else had tried to break in. The sheriff crouched, inspecting the mark with a practiced eye. "Yep," he said, his tone serious. This wasn't just curiosity. Someone wanted in, and they weren't supposed to be. I swallowed hard, the gravity of the moment settling in. The simple HOA drama I had expected had escalated into something far more dangerous. And that buzzing tension, the feeling that this wasn't over, clung to the air like dust in sunlight. Then, a faint sound came from behind the barn. Metal scraping, soft but deliberate. My pulse jumped. Whoever it was, they hadn't gone far. Sheriff Thompson straightened, his expression hardening. "Stay close," he said. "We're about to find out who's really trying to make this their property." The air outside the barn grew colder, the calm of the morning replaced by an electric anticipation. And in that instant, I realized the real drama was only just beginning. The scraping sound grew louder, more deliberate, echoing off the weathered barn walls. My stomach coiled tight and Daisy pressed herself against my leg, low growl vibrating in her chest. Sheriff Thompson's hand hovered near his belt, eyes scanning every shadow with laser focus. "Show yourself," he called, voice firm but steady, projecting authority without panic. For a moment there was silence. Then, a shape emerged from behind the hay bales, a figure dressed in black, crouched and awkward, clearly startled by the sudden illumination. The sun, catching the glint of a flashlight in their hand, revealed the unmistakable logo on their jacket, HOA Security. My jaw dropped. "Wait, you're them?" I asked, disbelief dripping from every word. The taller security man swallowed, clearly caught off guard. Ma'am, we were just following orders," he stammered, looking anywhere but me or the sheriff. Marilyn appeared at the barn door, her arms crossed, lips pressed tight. "Yes, following orders. I mean, that's all anyone's doing." Her voice cracked under pressure, trying to maintain authority but failing spectacularly. Sheriff Thompson stepped forward, his presence towering and undeniable. "Following orders does not give you the right to break into private property. You were instructed to stay outside. Do you understand that?" The taller man nodded sheepishly, while the shorter one, clipboard still clutched like a lifeline, muttered, "We didn't think. We thought you thought I'd just let you break in." I snapped, incredulous. "My barn! My grandfather built this. You actually thought I'd stand aside for your little HOA power trip." Marilyn fumed, but there was no clever comeback, no theatrics left. The sheriff's eyes flicked between her and the men. "Consider this a warning. Trespassing, intimidation. This stops now." Daisy barked sharply, as if punctuating the sheriff's words. The intruders shuffled back toward the barn door, suddenly very aware of how absurd and illegal their actions had been. I stepped forward, letting anger mix with relief. You know, in a normal HOA meeting, this might have been tedious, but actually sending people to break in, that's a new level. I paused, letting the words hang in the air, heavy and sharp. Marilyn's lips trembled, and I could see her calculating, spinning in her mind, desperate for a way to regain control. But the sheriff's steely gaze didn't waver. She didn't argue further, she couldn't. And just as I thought the tension might finally begin to ease, the sheriff's phone buzzed again. His expression shifted subtly, a hint of concern flashing behind his eyes. I felt the first real knot of dread since this started. "What now?" I asked, voice low. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stared past me, toward the tree line behind the barn, and muttered under his breath, "This isn't over. Someone else is coming." The sheriff's words hung in the air like a storm cloud. Someone else is coming. My stomach sank. After everything, the HOA drama, the trespassing, the confrontation, I thought the worst had passed. Apparently I was wrong. Through the gaps in the trees, I saw movement. A vehicle kicking up dust as it approached the barn. The engine's growl sounded too heavy for a sedan, more like a county patrol or an unmarked law enforcement truck. My pulse quickened. I'd assumed the sheriff had called this in, but the way the vehicle cut across the gravel with precision told me it wasn't just routine support. Marilyn's face went pale when she caught sight of the approaching truck. Her phone buzzed furiously in her hand, but she didn't even glance at it. The confident, controlling facade she had been clinging to was cracking fast. The sheriff gestured for me to stay close and moved toward the approaching vehicle. Daisy stayed glued to my side, tail low, ears alert. My hands were shaking slightly, but I forced myself to breathe. I had no idea what or who was coming, but I knew this was far bigger than any HOA drama should ever be. The truck stopped a few yards away, and 2 more deputies stepped out, badges glinting in the late morning sun. One of them gave the classic nod of acknowledgement to Sheriff Thompson. "We got your call," he said. "Situation's under control?" "Mostly," the sheriff replied, eyes still on the barn. "But we've got HOA security, caught inside attempting unauthorized entry." He gestured toward the 2 men still standing, sheepishly near the barn door, and I suspect there might be more complications. Marilyn let out a huff, clearly trying to interject, but Sheriff Thompson held up a hand. "Ma'am, step back. This is no longer your concern. You've escalated enough for today." The deputies moved swiftly, cordoning off the area around the barn and speaking briefly with the security men. I noticed the tension in the air shift slightly. The authority here was unmistakable. I realized that Marilyn, in her self-righteous fury, had underestimated not just me, but the reach of real law enforcement. I exhaled slowly, relief bubbling up, but it was tempered by the knowledge that my peaceful day on the property was completely gone. This had become something much bigger than HOA rules or paint colors. Then the sheriff's tone shifted, quiet but serious. "There's one more thing," he said. "The person who might have orchestrated this from behind the scenes. They've been identified, and they're on their way." I felt a cold shiver crawl down my spine. My barn, my home, the place I thought was safe, was about to become the center of a showdown. I had never imagined, and through the trees, I could see a figure emerging, moving quickly toward us, carrying something that glinted in the sun. The figure moving through the trees slowed as they reached the edge of the gravel driveway, and I finally got a clear look. My jaw dropped. It wasn't another intruder. Not exactly. It was the HOA president, herself, Marilyn, but she wasn't alone. Behind her trailed a small entourage of neighbors, all looking simultaneously outraged and terrified, holding cameras, phones, and one suspiciously large garden rake. "Marilyn," I said, my voice calm but sharp, "what exactly is the plan here?" She faltered, her usual bluster failing to mask the panic in her eyes. We just wanted to." Sheriff Thompson stepped forward, hands on his belt. "Step back now, you are done." His voice had that unflinching authority that made grown adults reconsider every life choice they'd ever made. Marilyn's shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of her. The neighbors whispered among themselves, unsure whether to take a side or retreat. I felt an odd mix of vindication and disbelief. This had spiraled so far out of control. It was almost cinematic. One of the deputies moved to guide Marilyn and her entourage to the edge of the property. "You've crossed the line," he said firmly. "Trespassing, intimidation, these are not HOA issues. They're legal issues." Daisy barked once, sharp and triumphant, as if she understood the stakes better than anyone. I laughed quietly, a mix of relief and exhaustion. My grandfather's barn, had survived, and so had I. Marilyn, red-faced, muttered something about, "This isn't the end," before being escorted away. I caught the flash of her phone, probably documenting every humiliating moment, but I no longer cared. Sheriff Thompson clapped me lightly on the shoulder. "You handled this well. Calm, measured. Didn't escalate, didn't panic. That counts for a lot." I nodded, still shaking slightly, taking in the scene. The deputies chatting quietly, Daisy circling my feet, the barn standing tall behind me. For a moment, I allowed myself to imagine a return to quiet mornings, the smell of hay and cut grass, and no more HOA drama. But even as relief washed over me, I knew one thing: suburban peace was fragile, easily shattered by unchecked power and self-righteousness. And while today I'd won, I also knew that the memory of this day, the ridiculous, terrifying, infuriating saga, would linger like the scent of old wood in a barn. I leaned against the barn door, Daisy at my side, and whispered to myself, "Next time someone thinks they can dictate how I live, well, they'll have the sheriff waiting." The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the property. I exhaled, feeling both exhausted and triumphant. My barn was safe, my sanity mostly intact. And Marilyn, well, some lessons just have to be learned the hard way. As the deputies drove away and quiet settled over the property once more, I realized this was my home, my rules, and no HOA or Karen was ever going to make me forget it. And hey, if you've ever had to deal with a power-hungry HOA or a full-blown Karen moment, you know how wild it can get. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more real-life neighborhood dramas, and drop a comment below sharing your own HOA horror story. I read every one of them, and trust me, some of them are just as unbelievable as this one.